Hi, welcome to today's issue of Reading Notes. So today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty fundamental to the study of composition and rhetoric, and this is the three rhetorical appeals of classical rhetoric. Most of you are probably somewhat familiar with these, though you may not be entirely clear on how they work. So a little bit of background. By the way, the three rhetorical appeals we're going to be talking about are ethos, pathos, and logos. This idea comes down to us through Aristotle's book. Aristotle, who was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 4th century BCE. The idea came down to us through Aristotle's book, The Rhetoric, which, as you can imagine, is basically about the art of making an argument. Now, Aristotle defines rhetoric in his book as the capacity to recognize in any given case the available means of persuasion. And what he means by the available means of persuasion are different ways of employing these three appeals. So we've got ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, these things work differently. But we basically talk, I'll scooch forward so you can see this, we basically tend to talk about the rhetorical triangle. So all of these techniques are interconnected. You can't really write without one of them, or at least you can't make an effective argument without one of them. So you need ethos, you need pathos, and you need logos. And they all do different things. They all supply different components of your arguments. So what I'm going to do today is talk through the three of these, talk through what they do, and try and give you guys a sense of how you can start creating these or emphasizing these in your own writing. So let's start with ethos here, which I've put at the top of the pyramid, somewhat arbitrarily. So ethos is basically about the credibility of an author. So this is how an author establishes that they're knowledgeable, that they have good intentions, that they are wise, that they are an ethically good person, whatever it is. This appeal is located with the speaker. So this is all about me as the speaker. Who am I? Who can I convince my audience that I am? And can I make them trust me and trust that I want what's best for them? Okay, quick and dirty summary. Pathos. This one's a lot of fun. Pathos is all about emotional appeals. So you try and sort of rile your audience up, get them to feel something, whether it's anger, pity, fear, hatred, sympathy, whatever it is. There's a lot of different kinds of these. Politicians like this one. Pathos is centered with audiences. So when we think about pathos, we're thinking about who is it that I'm talking to, what kinds of emotional reactions are they likely to have, and how can I generate those reactions. Pathos is a really good way of getting people to do things very quickly, because if you get, say, super angry about something, there's been an injustice done in the world and we need to go out and right it, people do that fairly quickly. Now, our third term here, third rhetorical appeal, is logos. This often gets translated in a sort of reductive way as logic, which is actually the translation I've given you here, but it's much more complicated than that. So logos is not just the logical arguments that you make, the ways in which you say, here are connections between two different things and stuff like this. Logos also involves things like the structure of an argument. So the way that it's organized. Like if you use the Toulmin model, for instance, this is a logical structure to an argument. And then logos involves things like word choice. Because in the Greek, logos is very much associated with the word. The term logos is a really sort of multifaceted Greek term. It's associated with the word, it's associated with study, it's associated with science and things like this. And you actually get all of those echoed in what logos means to rhetoricians. Now, logos is primarily associated with the message, the thing that you're saying, the argument that you're making, the kinds of evidence you're using, the structure that you're using, the word choice that you're using, and so on. So this is the rhetorical triangle. Now, some texts are really, really rhetorically effective, and one of the best ways, I think, and this is going to be pretty consistent advice across this series, one of the best ways to learn how to do rhetoric well is to read things that do rhetoric well. So, one thing, a great text, I would stack this up against any other piece of rhetoric in world history in terms of being effective for its time, place, and audience. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham City Jail, one of the most spectacularly rhetorically effective pieces I've ever read. What King does really, really well, first off, he identifies his audience. So he's writing to a group of pastors, he's writing to a group of clergymen, rabbis, priests, and so on. And basically he's saying, why aren't you guys supporting our struggle for freedom? This, of course, during the American Civil Rights Movement, the African American Civil Rights Movement. Why aren't you guys supporting our struggle for freedom? What does King do? Because you've got to remember, in the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. was not the sort of towering American icon that he is today. He was a much more controversial figure. There were a lot of people who didn't like what he was trying to do. So what does King do in this letter that's so effective? One, because he knows he's writing to clergy, a lot of his references, a lot of his allusions, a lot of his comparisons, a lot of his quotations come from the Bible. So King not only sort of establishes himself as a member of the clergy and as a learned person by these allusions and by these references, he also appeals to something that he knows his audience is going to like. They're going to say, ah, yes, Jesus, or Moses, whatever it is, King David, whatever it is, that is a thing that we know, we can identify with, and we like. So this is how we get both an ethos and a pathos thing. One of the things that King does really well across most of his speeches and letters and other kinds of writing is pathos. This is be fair, during the Civil Rights Movement, there was a lot of examples of things you could use for pathos. So in this letter, King talks about like abuses of children, like the way in which these the people who are pro-segregation, who are fighting the demonstrators, fighting the protesters and things like this, would beat children and things like this. And there are these like horrendous images in King's letter, and the purpose of that is to generate pathos. The purpose of that is so the audience can feel this sort of pain that these children go through and say, this is a terrible thing. I have to do something about this. And then he's got logos. Like King has appeals to religious laws about equality. He has appeals to historical precedent, the continuous expansion of rights in the U.S., and things like this. If you haven't read Letter from Birmingham City Jail, it's fantastic. Read it, study it for its rhetorical appeals. Now, how do you yourself do this? Because there's a huge difference between saying, okay, I found this rhetorical appeal in a paper, and I can do this myself. Practice. Practice, practice, practice. attempt over and over and over again to use these rhetorical appeals as cleverly as you can in as many ways as you can. And you've got to keep writing. You've got to keep writing.